So you can kind of see this thread of going back perhaps thousands of years of humanity discovering DMT or discovering how to use DMT, even when they didn't know that they were working with DMT, and developing technologies to how best to use it. You know, how do we develop this as a technology? Is vaporizing it the culmination, the pinnacle of DMT administration technologies? Of course not. Is it intravenous injection? Maybe not. And then this finally leads, well, not finally, because I'll talk about the future as well and what we're working on now, but leads to DMTX. Right? You have this very short-acting experience, which is very intense, but only lasts a few minutes. And what DMTX does, or extended state DMT, is allows you, as we were saying right at the beginning, to extend this. So I see that as just simply the next iteration of humans learning to use and develop DMT as a technology. And the word technology is important because if you just think of it as a drug, then it doesn't really capture what DMT is doing.
Sure.
If you take seriously the idea that it allows you to communicate with some kind of normally hidden, unseen, discarnate, intelligent agent, that feels more like a molecular communication technology than a drug to me. And once you shift your mindset in that way from drug, psychedelic drug, to technology, then you start to think, well, what's the best way to use this technology? And DMTX, as I said, I think is just the next iteration. But I think we can go further than that, right? So we know since the 1950s, psychiatrists and physicians and pharmacologists have been drawing blood from people and collecting pee samples and finding DMT in humans, but no one really knows what it does. There are hypotheses, but no one's 100% clear why it's in the human body. But at least we know that the human body can produce, manufacture DMT, and at significant quantities. All the machinery is there. So I was just towards the end of writing Death by Astonishment, getting to the very final chapter, and I was thinking about the future. You know, what does using the DMT technology look like in 10, 20 years? Are we still hooking people up to infusion machines and pumping them with DMT over long periods? Or can we somehow hack the brain's endogenous DMT system? So we move away from the plant world, you know, which was going on for thousands of years. And we move away from laboratory synthesized DMT, and we finally reach the stage where we're actually using our own DMT production laboratory in our own brains. So rather than injecting someone with DMT, you would simply, by understanding the regulatory mechanisms that control DMT production in the human brain, we might be able to actually stimulate the production of DMT and induce people into the DMT state without giving them any DMT. We know now that, well, way back, so 50 years ago, there was a study that's been forgotten about that showed that in mammalian brain, in rabbit brain, first of all, but also in human cerebrospinal fluid, there is this peptide that we all have that inhibits an enzyme called indolethylamine N-methyltransferase, which is the key enzyme that produces DMT. So it converts tryptamine to DMT. Oh. Right? So DMT is manufactured in the body from tryptophan, which is an amino acid. So tryptophan is decarboxylated. That's a very simple process. You remove a carbon dioxide molecule, and you get tryptamine. Then you add two methyl groups, so two CH3 groups, and that gives you DMT. Very easy to make. And we all have this enzyme, indolethylamine N-methyltransferase, INMT, in us. It's in basically everywhere in the body, in all cells, basically. So what they discovered in, I think, 1976, that we all have a peptide that binds to INMT and basically puts the brakes on DMT production. So it keeps DMT production at a very low level. It inhibits this key enzyme for DMT production. And so this peptide inhibitor of INMT, it was isolated, and we have a kind of a basic, broad, rough molecular mass of it, but that's it. They didn't do any further characterization. I mean, this was a long time ago, so it wasn't so easy then to do that kind of thing. But then the paper was basically forgotten about. It's been cited 4 times in 50 years, so it's gone. A couple of years later, there was one that found a similar peptide in human cerebrospinal fluid. That's been cited once in 50 years. So people basically forgot about this. So I kind of uncovered this, stumbled across this paper, and thought, well, let's isolate this peptide. Let's actually characterize it. Let's determine its actual structure, its actual peptide sequence, how this peptide actually works, how it's integrated with other regulatory mechanisms in the human body. Then perhaps we can, once we understand how this peptide works and how the regulatory system for DMT works, then we've got an in for hacking this system.
Yeah.
So we've actually recruited, contracted. So myself and New Nautics, this non-profit out of Florida, who I've been working with for a number of years, we approached the University of Florida, a very prominent pharmacologist and peptide chemist called Chris McCurdy, and said, we'd like to isolate this peptide. We want to understand it, how it works. We want to understand how DMT is regulated in humans. And we're basically, he developed this research project with his team, research plan, and this is happening. It's kind of being initiated now. Unfortunately, these things are expensive, so we are still seeking people if they want to help fund this. I mean, it's like $400,000, so it's not pocket change for this initial stage of the project. So if anyone is interested, go to newnautics.org, NOONAUTICS.org, and they can help out. But we hope that by the end of next year or something, we will understand a lot more about how DMT is regulated. Until we know, there's 2 broad possibilities when we isolate and characterize this peptide. One is it could be a known peptide, right? So it's a peptide. There's many endogenous peptides, small, relatively small peptides, endorphins, for example, right? These are peptides. Insulin, this is a peptide. So if it's one we know, then that's good news in a way, because we probably know about how the regulatory system works. So we might be able to, whether we inhibit that peptide directly and stop it working, or whether we can get into the system and actually stop the peptide being produced, temporarily, so that it kind of frees up the INMT to begin churning out more DMT. That would be one approach. The alternative is that it's a completely novel peptide that no one's seen before, that we don't know about. Right. That's interesting and good news for entirely different reasons, because you found something completely new, which would be really cool. But at the same time, we'd know basically nothing about it, so we wouldn't know how it plugs into other regulatory systems in the body and in the brain. So that would maybe require more work. Be that you inject a small peptide that might interact directly with this inhibitory peptide,
right.
Or it might it could even work at the genetic level, where you're switching off the gene that produces this peptide.
Yes,
that could be much longer lasting, and this might last for days, weeks, or even months. This is serious business. So yes, you bypass all of the legal difficulties you have with injecting someone with the Schedule 1 drug.
Yeah,
that's gone, and you are simply manipulating using tools. And it could be genetic, it could be molecular. There are various possibilities. We don't know anything about this system yet, so we can just speculate on how we might work this and whether it would be a long-lasting effect. You might have to inject them with something, but maybe once, and then it would last for days or weeks. And then, you'd have these individuals in a pod of some sort. All of their bodily needs would be taken care of, and feeding and waste management, and they would basically spend significant portions of their lives ultimately, right? Interfacing with, living amongst these intelligent beings from somewhere else, and they would forget probably that they were ever a human. That happens with DMT. We'll talk about your experiences perhaps, but often with DMT, what happens, even with in 2 or 3 minutes, you will lose any conception of what it ever meant to be a human, and that part is gone, and you're in that world now. You're a being, a conscious, intelligent being that exists within this other world. So you can imagine over days or weeks or months or whatever, basically having an entirely new existence that would have been, in your own mind, that would be kind of all you've ever known. And so any conception of once having been a human is gone. And you become the alien in a sense until you start to come back, and then you kind of remember again and you integrate back into this reality.
Yes.